Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. For those who are new here, my name is Katarina. In this video, I will be showing you crafty things I took with me on a 6-month trip in a motorhome. This trip took place last year. Me and my husband, we were traveling for 6 months in our motorhome across Scandinavia. I wanted to make this video last year, never managed to do that. However, we decided to do this trip this year again. If you watch my update video, you probably know it did not go as planned, but I pretty much took the same things I did last year. I added few things, removed few things, and except of one extra box and a few additional stamps, I did take exactly the same things I did last year. And the extra things I took with me, I packed because along the way we wanted to look at some houses in Sweden and hopefully at the end of summer buy one. As I said, the trip did not go as planned. We actually bought the house at the end of spring, so way sooner than anticipated, and we only traveled for 2 months, but I packed for longer than that. And also, you can say that all these things that I will show you today that I packed are my favorites, or at least current favorites. These things I really enjoy using, or there are some things that I haven't used for a while and I would like to use in the near future. But in true honesty, I like all the crafty products that are out there, even those I do not own, but I had to compress them into something that makes more sense to take on a trip in a motorhome. For example, let's talk about one thing I did not take, and that is a die cutting machine. I have the die cutting machine from Sizzix in the regular size, and even though this is not the biggest die cutting machine they offer, it is still rather heavy and bulky. And this year there would have been enough space for a die cutting machine in our motorhome, but last year I hardly made any cards. The thing is, I not only felt lazy and did not feel like card making, but also the desk in our motorhome is quite high. I'm petite, so it's not really the most comfortable space for crafting. And I'm not even talking about the mess card making creates, especially in such a small space. So I decided not to take the die cutting machine with me this year as well, even though I really enjoy using it. But let me show you what I actually took with me. I hope this video is not too long. I feel like this intro was way too long already. And I might split this video in 2 parts. If I do so, it will be in the title. I grouped the things into 3 groups depending where they were stored in the motorhome. And I will start with the bulky stuff. Here behind me I have 2 boxes. In one box are the stamps. The other box is the extra box that I took with me. And I also have here my craft mat. So this is my craft mat. It's in the size A3. And I just use it to keep my crafting space clean. The size A4 would have been probably enough for the motorhome, but I needed a new craft mat anyway, so I decided to buy the A3. And in our motorhome, I store the mat in our wardrobe, tucked in against the wall. And here in the house, I'm so happy I have a big desk now with 2 sections, one dedicated for the computer and the other half dedicated for my crafting, with the craft mat being on the table all the time. So next I have here this box, or actually it's a case, and I store here most of my stamp sets and some dies and stencils. This box actually belongs to my husband, but surprise, surprise, it was me who bought it for him and he let me borrow it. Last year I had all my stamp sets in a box from IKEA, but I needed something more secure that you actually can lock. And also I need something bigger to add additional stamp sets. I didn't need so many stamp sets for the actual trip, but I did not know when we will be going back to pick up the rest of our stuff from our parents' house, and I needed enough supplies to keep me through the winter. As you can see, the box is filled up. I will not go through every stamp set I have here. I might do that in a separate video, otherwise this video would be way too long. But I have here plenty of stamps I have never used before. Then I have my favorite stamp sets that I like to color. I took quite a few stamp sets with sentiments. And I also have here some stamps for Christmas. As I said, I don't know if we will be going back to pick up the rest of our stuff from our parents' house this year. And I didn't do my Christmas card series last year, and I don't want to do that again. And as I mentioned earlier, I have here some stencils and dies. Yes, I did take some dies, even though I did not take my die cutting machine with me. I was thinking I will buy a new one, something like the Sizzix foldable. It's quite small and it's not bulky, but it's quite pricey. I think it costs over 100 euro. And my old die cutting machine is working fine, it's not broken. And in such cases, I really find it difficult to justify such purchases. So I decided that I will do without a die cutting machine for a while. So that was the box with my stamps, and now let's talk about this big box behind me. So this box is one of the extra things that I did not take with me last year. I just wanted to have an extra box to add a few additional things. I took all the stuff out of the box so you can see it better, except of 3 items. All these things I didn't have with me last year. And the 3 things are my heat gun and a fixative spray and also one of the paper blocks. The few cards I made didn't need any heat embossing, it was not that kind of a project, but heat embossing is definitely one of my favorite things to do, especially when I'm watercoloring, so I had to take my heat embossing supplies with me. And for the fixative spray, I read somewhere that this is used to preserve the colors of a painting, and I'm using cheap coloring supplies, so I thought it might be a good idea. For example, one of my cards where I used the ZigBrush markers completely faded, so I thought having something that preserves the colors from fading is a good idea. But I keep on forgetting to use it, so I have no idea if it works. And of course, the person who gets the card would need to tell me that the colors faded. Next, I have here a stamping tool from the Tonic Studios and Tim Holtz. I took it because I also took with me my background stamps. You do not need to use a stamping tool to use background stamps, but it's just easier. I also took with me the gouache colors I showed you in my last haul. I haven't used it yet, but I'm hoping to use it on few projects in the near future. And I also have here a tin with empty pans. I originally thought I will use it for my watercolors and expand my watercolor collection, but the watercolor pans I have are smaller than the ones in this tin, so I decided to use them for the gouache. Next, I have here the Nuvo gilding flakes and the deco foil from iCraft. The deco foil I have never used before, but the gilding flakes I used once and I really liked it. So I wanted to use it again and also try out the deco foil and make some fun projects. Maybe on Christmas cards, we'll see. And as I was deciding what crafty things to take with me when I was going through my stash, I stumbled across this envelope with my old pattern paper leftovers. And since it's not too bulky, I took it. When I started card making, I used pattern paper quite often, but I haven't used it for a while. So I'm hoping there is going to be a project in the near future that calls for pattern paper and I can use it finally again. Then I have here a few extra embellishments, enamel dots and some buttons. I also have here spare adhesives. And I have some extra cellophane bags to protect the cards. I know it's not environment friendly, but I want to protect the cards from moisture and I have no idea what else to use. Especially because I want to sell the cards, so they need to be protected somehow. What do you guys use to store your cards? Do you put them into some protective bags? Let me know in the comments below. Next, I have here a few extra stamps, mainly background stamps. I also have an extra cardstock. I have here the Canson XL Mixed Media and watercolor pads and a cheap paper block that I use for tracing. And lastly, I have here an extra adhesive foil. Normally, I would have used a laminator, but I do not have one anymore. But I did here exactly the same what would you do with laminating. I covered a piece of a cardstock with the foil, and I'm using it as a palette for my watercolors and to blend with distress inks. The foiled cardstock I'm storing somewhere else, but I wanted to take a little bit extra just in case. So that is all for this box. Both of these boxes inside of the motorhome were stored in a storage below the floor, simply because I did not need to have immediate access to them. The next 2 groups of items were stored in more accessible parts of the motorhome. They were stored in 2 cupboards. I do not have any clips or photos of how the things looked like when they were stored inside of the cupboards, but I show you at least clips of the empty cupboards so you can a little bit visualize how the things looked like and how much I could fit in there. I will start with the front side cupboard. Here I had just few things. This is a cupboard where I had to remove few things that I had with me last year, just some notebooks and little things, because I wanted my paper cutter to fit better. Every time I opened the cupboard, the paper cutter kept falling out, and by removing just few items, it stayed in place. The paper cutter I have is this small one from Fiskars. It's a guillotine. I did buy it for this trip. I have the guillotine from Tonic Studios that cuts an A4 size cardstock vertically, but that would have been way too big for this trip, and I wanted to have a small guillotine anyway, just to have something smaller on my desk for those little cutting jobs. The next thing I had in this cupboard was this plastic case, and I have here most of my cardstock. In my craft room, the cardstock I'm using on regular basis I'm storing in magazine boxes, and this kind of boxes, these plastic boxes, I use for my excess cardstock. And because I needed a storage for my cardstock for the motorhome, this was a great solution. So what kind of cardstock I have here? First of all, I have few envelopes here. Last year I forgot them, so I made sure this year they are with me. Then I have here cardstock for my card bases. For the card bases I use the weight 300 GSM, which is 140 pounds in the US. And I have the colors white, black and craft. I don't have any other colors of cardstock here. Actually, I stopped buying new colored cardstock for my card bases. It's mainly because I only use these 3 colors, and if I want to add color to my card bases, I just use a lighter cardstock, or I use a pattern paper or distress inks. I have few sheets of cardstock for card bases that I pre-cut, and I store the pre-cut cardstock in these bigger cellophane bags. I do have some pre-scored cardstock as well, but storing it without scoring is less bulky. Actually, another thing I stopped doing is creating top folding vertical cards like these. When I started card making, top folding vertical cards were something new and I really liked it. And when I started my blog, it was really great for taking photographs because the card stands nicely. But now I don't take photos of the cards standing up, I just lay them flat on the table and take photos from the top. And also I notice when people receive top folding vertical cards, they are sometimes very confused when they are opening them. And since I'm not taking photos where the card stands, I just make side folding vertical cards and top folding horizontal cards. This way I only need to cut it into one size, which is the A5 size, then I fold it, and this creates both vertical and horizontal cards. The rest of the cardstock I put into plastic folders in its original size A4. Except of some extra cardstock for the card bases, I have here watercolor cardstock, some craft cardstock and Bristol cardstock, and also some specialty cardstock. And the last thing I stored in the front cupboard was this plastic pouch. I don't have much here. I just store here the Gonzai Tambi watercolor palette from Kuretake, and I also have here a cork board that I use to tape my cardstock when I'm watercoloring. And in the last cupboard I had my most important things, simply because this cupboard was right above the seating area where I was sitting when we were stationary, and it was very easy to access things. This cupboard has 2 shelves and it fits so much, and in the bottom shelf I stored this bunch of stuff. I have here 2 collapsible water containers to use for dirty and clean water when I'm watercoloring. Then I have here this sponge that I use to clean my stamps. It's one of these sponges that are stiff when they are dry. And these 3 things were on top of this pink plastic container. I have here mainly all my watercolor pencils and markers, and I put them into Ziploc bags just so they don't mix with each other. I have watercolor pencils from Faber-Castell. This is the inexpensive version. Then I have here the Koi brush markers from Sakura. My Zig brush markers are also here. I have the 24 set plus 1 extra in red. And lastly, I have here these brush markers. These ones are one of these items that you can get on Amazon from different brands. The ones I have are from a brand called STA. Then I managed to fit in the Gonzai Tambi golden watercolors. I also have here a white paint and a spray bottle. And I also have here some clear embellishments like sequins. I also have here the action wobblers, but I put them here because I was making a card where I wanted to use them. Otherwise, they were in the case with the stamps. And on the other part of the bottom shelf, I stored my pencil case. I have here both Faber-Castell Polychromos and the Prisma pencils. And I really love this case. It took me a while to find it. This pencil case is just the right size. It has 150 slots and it's not too bulky. On top of the pencil case, I put my two books I showed you in the last haul. One to learn to watercolor and the other to learn to draw. Then I have here my two sketchbooks. One is with watercolor cardstock, the other one has a lighter cardstock. And I also put here my foam tape. And lastly, on the bottom shelf, I had my rulers and also my pencil sharpener. This one is battery operated because once I had to sharpen a bunch of pencils at once and I had blisters on my hands. That's when I bought this battery operated pencil sharpener and I like it. And on top of the shelf, I had this bunch of things. I had here all my mini distress ink cubes. I stored them in the tins that you can buy for them and they fit easily on the shelf, so I took them all. I think distress inks with brush markers and normal watercolors are my favorite coloring supplies. I do like coloring with pencils, but it just takes way longer and I like to make cards that are quick and easy. I also took a few colored ink cubes and put them into an extra tin that I had. I don't own too many colored inks as I don't use them too often. I don't have too many stamps on which I could use such inks, but I wanted to have a few inks just in case. I also have here swatches for all the distress ink colors and a small sketchbook and a small watercolor pad from Canson. Then I have these two pencil cases, or I think they are more like makeup cases. I bought them in the shop Flying Tiger. In the green one, I store my alcohol markers from Alta New. I bought 4 packs last year, so I have 16 markers and they fit perfectly in this case. And this gray pencil case contains few very important items. I have here all kinds of little things. I have here pens and pencils, some extra adhesive, glue pens, glitter pens, scissors, water brush pens, my bone folder, blending tool, some tweezers, a stamp with my logo, well, my old logo, and some other things. Next, I have here these two plastic pouches. They fit a cardstock in the size A5. In the first one, I have a cardstock that I pre-cut into A6 panels. And I made paper dividers, or more like paper folders, for each brand or type. Like Bristol cardstock has its own folder, watercolor cardstock, pattern paper, cardstock from Paper Mill Direct, and so on. I also put here a few card bases and some cellophane bags. And I have here those two laminated or foiled papers I mentioned earlier. I use them with distress inks when I'm blending or as a watercolor palette. Last year I took a white plate for the watercolor palette and it was just way too bulky. In the other pouch I have a few stamp sets. Stamp sets I want to use for my next projects and also a few stamp sets with sentiments so I don't have to go constantly to the big case as it's in the storage that is not easily accessible. And I have here a few pre-stamped or pre-die cut things, also some leftovers from other projects. I store them in some envelopes, pre-die cut some tags, frames, circle dies, and so on. Since I don't have the die cutting machine with me, I wanted to take with me few die cuts just in case. And in the other envelopes, I have few pre-made things or some panels I pre-stamped and I just need to color them. I usually forget I have these, but last year I needed to make a quick card and I just picked one of the pre-stamped panels, colored it, added a sentiment and adhered it to a card base and the card was done. And lastly, in this cupboard I stored 2 plastic boxes. I stored here all kinds of things. The first box was always on top because it contained more important things and I wanted to be more accessible. This box, together with the grey pencil case and the 2 pouches, I probably needed the most. The other things I needed as well, but you know, there is a hierarchy. In this box I had my Minimisty stamping tool and bunch of acrylic blocks, ink pads with black inks and Versamark ink, a plastic bag with all my brushes and the Winsor & Newton watercolor palette, stamp cleaners, adhesives, clear Nuvo drops, 1 ink blender, the rest is in the other box. What else I have here? A baker's twine and compass and so on. And in this second box, I have an extra adhesive, hole punch, extra pencils, some embellishments, the rest of Movo drops that I own. In the pink container, I put anti-static powder. I had it in a glass jar before, which was too bulky. Then I also have here my most used embossing powders like white, clear, and few metallic powders. And underneath of that, I have the rest of my blending tools and few of the replacement foams, extra ink pads, refills for a Versamark pad, removable adhesive, extra post-it notes, those that have full adhesive on the back to use for masking. I also have here a hairspray. I'm not sure why I bought it. I think for keeping stencils in place. And on the side of the box, I have a wax crayons for watercoloring technique. I only needed the white, but they weren't selling them separately, so I had to buy the pack. This is quite a lot of stuff that I was able to fit into the motorhome, alright? And despite having so many card making supplies, I hardly made any. So what did I do if I did not make cards? Well, I did craft, but instead of making cards, I did crochet. I think I mentioned that in my last haul. I really like to crochet doilies. I have so many patterns. It doesn't create a mess, which is very important in a small space. And this year, during the 2 months when we were staying in our motorhome before we moved into our new house, I crocheted a lot of doilies. These are all the doilies I crocheted. Pretty crazy, right? But I just sit down, watch a movie on my iPad or listen to a podcast and I crochet. Anyways, these are all the things that I took with me on the trip in our motorhome, and consequently these are my first crafty things that I took with me into our new house. Of course, I would not take all these things if we went on a shorter trip. I just was telling my husband that our motorhome is going to be empty. Also, fun fact, all the things I had in the 2 cupboards I was able to fit onto the Raskog trolley from IKEA. Alright, that is all for this video. I hope it's not too long. If you have any questions and would like to know details about some products, just write your question in the comments below this video. Also on my blog, each blog post, when you scroll down, there is a leave a comment section. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would really appreciate if you gave this video a thumbs up and also subscribe, as it helps my channel to grow. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.